At 2:47 a.m., after months of late-night work, I watched the system I built begin to fail. And for the first time, I didn't touch the keyboard. My coworker had taken the credit, management had rewarded him, and now the $21 million launch was asking for me. You gave him $38,000? The conference room went silent so fast I could hear the ventilation system clicking above us. My manager, Derek, kept one hand on the printed compensation sheets like he could physically stop the numbers from becoming real. Across the table, Evan stared at his coffee. He had spent the last 6 months presenting my work as our project, then his initiative, and finally, apparently, as something valuable enough to earn him a $38,000 bonus. Mine was $5,000. Same launch, same deadlines, same sleepless nights. Except I had designed the architecture, rewritten the broken deployment process, handled the vendor integration, and spent more evenings in that office than the cleaning crew. Evan had attended meetings, repeated my updates with better posture, and somehow turned proximity into ownership. Compensation is based on overall impact, Derek said carefully. I looked at him. Then show me the impact calculation. His expression tightened. That was the first moment I knew this wasn't an accounting mistake. I didn't raise my voice. That almost made Derek more uncomfortable. I slid my laptop around and opened the project history. Hundreds of commits under my name. Architecture documents I had authored. Incident reports I had closed. Emails where Evan had asked me what certain parts of the system actually did. There was even one message from 3 months earlier. Can you send me a simple explanation before the executive review? I don't want to get caught off guard. I had answered him at 1:18 a.m. because that was what I did back then. I fixed problems before they became visible. Derek barely looked at the screen. This isn't about who typed what. I almost laughed. Good, because I also led the technical design, ran the migration, trained support, and fixed the production failures. He leaned back. Evan demonstrated leadership. There it was, the magic corporate word, leadership. A soft little blanket management could throw over any decision they didn't want examined too closely. Evan finally looked up. I never said you didn't contribute. Contribute. 6 months of late-night work had been reduced to the language people use when someone brings napkins to a picnic. I asked him one question. Who built the recovery layer after the February outage? He blinked. The team did. Who wrote it? Silence. Who found the data corruption issue during the vendor migration? More silence. Derek stepped in before Evan could answer. This is becoming confrontational. I nodded. No, this is becoming specific. And specificity, I was learning, was poison to workplace favoritism. The more precise I became, the less comfortable the room felt. I had been an experienced employee there for 7 years. I knew which systems failed quietly, which dashboards lied, which executives panicked when numbers turned red, and which launch night problems could be solved in 10 minutes if you knew where to look. That hidden employee value had never bothered me before. I liked being useful. I liked being the person people called when something broke at midnight. But usefulness can become a trap when a company starts treating reliability like free infrastructure. I had worked weekends without logging the hours. I had answered messages from grocery store aisles, airports, family dinners, and once from the parking lot of a dentist's office. Nobody ordered me to. They simply learned that I would always say yes. overworked employee, key employee, underappreciated employee. Different labels for the same mistake. I had trained them to believe my extra effort cost nothing. Derek ended the meeting by telling me the compensation decision was final. "We value you," he said. I looked at the $5,000 bonus sheet between us. This is an interesting way to express it. Evan shifted in his chair. Derek ignored the comment and told me we could discuss career growth after the launch. The major product launch was 3 weeks away, a $21 million rollout tied to contracts, implementation deadlines, and enough executive attention to make everyone suddenly discover the importance of teamwork. I closed my laptop. "Okay." Derek actually smiled, relieved. He thought okay meant I had accepted it. What it meant was much simpler. I finally understood the arrangement. That afternoon, I stopped doing invisible work. I completed every task assigned to me. I answered questions during normal hours. I documented decisions. I attended required meetings. But when Evan messaged at 8:36 p.m., "Can you review my launch readiness slides tonight?" I didn't respond. When Derek sent a quick question at 10:11, I saw it the next morning. When a vendor emailed me directly because they had grown accustomed to bypassing the official process and going straight to the person who actually solved things, I forwarded the request to the project channel. No sabotage, no dramatic resignation, no office revenge. I simply stopped donating labor the company had decided wasn't valuable enough to recognize. The reaction was almost immediate. By Thursday, Evan's confident updates had become strangely vague. By Friday, Derek asked why several small issues were taking longer than usual. I reminded him that the owners listed in the project plan were handling them. "You usually jump in," he said. "I usually did," I replied. He stared at me for a second too long. That was when I realized something important. Management had confused my generosity with a job requirement. Before leaving that evening, I opened a private folder and saved copies of my performance reviews, project history, written evidence, launch documents, and every email showing who had designed what. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning anything dramatic at all. I just had 7 years of experience telling me that when people become nervous about their decisions, memories suddenly become flexible. And judging by the message waiting in my inbox Monday morning, someone had already started rewriting the story. The email was from Derek, sent at 6:12 a.m., with Evan copied and 3 directors added for effect. The subject line read, "Launch Ownership Clarification." By the second paragraph, I understood exactly what was happening. According to Derek, recent delays were caused by unclear technical ownership and a reduction in proactive support. Translation: now that I had stopped doing unpaid extra work, management wanted a written record suggesting the problems had started with me. Evan replied 12 minutes later, "Happy to step up and stabilize things." I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. The man who still messaged me privately asking where deployment logs were stored had apparently become the person stabilizing the $21 million launch. I didn't argue. I clicked Reply All and wrote 4 lines. I confirmed my assigned responsibilities, listed everything currently completed, linked the approved project plan, and asked Derek to identify any overdue task formally assigned to me. Then I hit send. He never answered the question. Instead, at 9 a.m., I was pulled into a meeting with Derek and someone from compensation. Her name was Melissa, and unlike Derek, she had the unsettling habit of reading documents before speaking. "We understand you have concerns about the bonus allocation," she said. "I have concerns about how project ownership was represented," I replied. Derek immediately jumped in. "We already discussed this." Melissa turned to him. "I'd still like to understand it." That tiny sentence changed the temperature in the room. I opened the project history again, but this time I didn't explain anything emotionally. I walked her through dates. Design approval, mine. Vendor recovery plan, mine. Production rollback procedure, mine. Executive demo environment, mine. Evan's contribution appeared mostly in presentation decks, status meetings, and summaries created after the technical work had already been completed. The $38,000 bonus suddenly looked very different beside my $5,000 bonus when the timeline was placed between them. Derek tried another angle. Evan had broader visibility. Melissa looked at him. Visibility isn't the same as contribution. For the first time since this started, Derek had no immediate response. I almost admired the irony. For months, office favoritism had survived because everything important lived in conversations, assumptions, and polished presentations. The moment someone from compensation asked for written evidence, the whole structure began creaking like cheap office furniture. Melissa asked me to send my documentation directly to her. Derek said, "I don't think we need to turn this into a bonus investigation." She replied, "I didn't call it that." His face changed anyway. By noon, Evan was waiting beside my desk. "You went to compensation?" he asked quietly. They were in the meeting. "You know what I mean." I looked at him. "No, Evan, what do you mean?" He lowered his voice further. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." That sentence did more damage than any insult could have. 6 months of stolen credit, an unfair bonus, late-night work, and now a paper trail showing exactly who had built the project. And somehow, I was the one making things uncomfortable. "Then it should be easy to clear up," I said. He leaned closer. "You know, leadership isn't just coding." "Correct," I smiled slightly. "It also includes understanding the thing you're leading." His jaw tightened. He walked away without answering. That afternoon, the launch environment failed its first full-volume simulation. Nothing exploded. That would almost have been easier. Instead, transactions started slowing, queues backed up, and error rates climbed in neat little steps across the monitoring dashboard. Derek appeared behind me within minutes. "Can you take a look?" I already had. I knew exactly what the pattern suggested. 6 months earlier, I would have opened 3 terminals, called the vendor, patched the bottleneck, and stayed until the graphs turned green. But the remediation owner in the project plan was Evan. The same Evan leadership had rewarded for broader impact. "I can support the assigned owner," I said. Derek blinked. "This is critical." "I know." "We launch in 9 days." "I know." He stared at me as though repeating the stakes might reactivate the old version of me. "Can you just fix it?" There it was. Not, "Can the team fix it?" Not, "What's the process?" Just the familiar emergency lever management had been pulling for years. "I can handle my assigned responsibilities," I said. "If you want ownership changed, send it in writing." His expression hardened. "This feels like malicious compliance." "No," I said. "It's the project structure you approved." By 7:30 p.m., the office had become a different place. Conference rooms were lit. Food containers appeared on desks. Slack notifications fired constantly. Evan moved between engineers asking questions he should have known the answers to. The replacement failure was becoming visible in real time. Not because I had broken anything, but because management had finally forced the project to operate according to the ownership chart they had used to justify the bonuses. At 10:46 p.m., Melissa emailed me again. She asked for 3 specific documents: the original architecture proposal, the February incident report, and the executive briefing where project responsibilities had first been assigned. I sent them immediately. 10 minutes later, she replied with a single sentence: "Thank you. Please preserve all related correspondence." That was the moment this stopped feeling like a compensation review. And before midnight, Derek received a calendar invitation he definitely wasn't expecting. If this story already feels familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe, leave your take below, and tell me, when does being a team player become letting a company take advantage of you? Derek came out of the executive conference room at 8:18 the next morning, looking like he hadn't slept. By then, everyone had noticed the directors arriving early: Melissa from compensation carrying a thick folder, and Evan pacing near the elevators. At 9:07, Melissa asked me to join them. A project timeline filled the screen: February recovery design, mine; vendor migration, mine; scaling architecture, mine; deployment automation, mine; launch contingency plan, mine. Evan's name appeared mostly beside presentations and executive updates. Melissa looked at Derek. Who recommended the $38,000 bonus? He cleared his throat. I did. It reflected leadership contribution. The VP leaned forward. Based on whose technical assessment? Derek hesitated. Evan provided the project summaries. Then the VP turned to Evan. Based on whose work? Evan gave the safest answer possible. It was collaborative. Melissa opened an email. I recognized it immediately. Months earlier, Evan had asked me to explain the recovery architecture because he didn't understand it well enough for an executive presentation. 15 minutes after I replied, he had forwarded my explanation almost word for word, removed my name, and introduced it as my recommended approach. The VP read the message twice. Did you design this recovery model? Evan stared at the table. Derek tried to intervene. Project leads synthesize technical input all the time. Melissa didn't argue. She simply added the email to the file. That was worse. The meeting ended quietly. Melissa told me the compensation review would remain open and asked me to preserve all related correspondence. The VP asked Derek and Evan to stay behind. I went back to my desk, thinking the morning couldn't get much more uncomfortable. 10 minutes later, the launch alarms started. The full volume test had failed again. Transaction latency climbed, vendor acknowledgements slowed, and a queue that should have cleared in seconds began stacking into the thousands. Evan flooded the team channel with questions. 3 engineers tagged me. I posted the documentation link. Then Evan called. We need you in the war room. I'm available. Then get in here. 6 engineers were already staring at dashboards when I arrived. Evan stood in the center trying to coordinate them, but nobody had a complete view of the recovery layer. I did. I had built it. Derek pointed at the screen. We're losing the test window. Can you fix this? That component is assigned to Evan. His expression hardened. This is critical. I know. We launch in 9 days. I know. Then just fix it. I looked at him. If you want me responsible for it, assign it to me in writing. Give me authority to modify it, approve the change, and document me as the technical owner. Evan exhaled sharply. Can we stop with the technicalities? Ownership wasn't a technicality when bonuses were assigned. the room went silent. For nearly an hour, they tried everything except sending that email. Evan moved engineers between dashboards. Derek called the vendor. 2 configuration changes failed. The queue kept climbing. The launch countdown on the wall kept moving. At 12:41 p.m., my inbox refreshed. Subject: Technical Ownership, Launch Recovery Layer. Derek had formally assigned me authority over the component through launch. I read it once, opened my laptop, and walked to the whiteboard. Okay, now we can fix it. I traced the failure to a retry rule colliding with the vendor throttle, divided the remediation between 3 engineers, and handled the architecture change myself. 28 minutes later, the queue began dropping. 15 minutes after that, the test stabilized, green across the dashboard. Nobody celebrated. Evan stared at the screen. Derek looked relieved. Then Melissa appeared in the doorway holding the same folder from that morning. "Derek," she said, "we need to continue our conversation." He stood. Melissa looked past him. "And I need her there, too." Melissa closed the conference room door behind us and placed 3 documents on the table. The first was my original architecture proposal. The second was Evan's bonus recommendation. The third was Derek's performance summary for me. She tapped the pages with one finger. "These don't match." Derek shifted in his chair. My review described me as dependable, technically strong, and primarily execution-focused. Evan's recommendation described him as the strategic force behind the launch, the person who had created the technical direction and guided the recovery architecture. Melissa looked at Derek. "You approved both descriptions within 11 days of each other." He started explaining that performance reviews were broader than individual projects, that wording could be subjective, that leadership involved more than direct technical contribution. The VP cut him off. "Did you verify Evan's claims before recommending $38,000? Derek's silence answered before he did. Then Melissa turned to me. "Did anyone ask you to review the project contribution summary before bonuses were finalized?" "No." "Were you told Evan had been listed as the technical lead?" "No." She opened another email. This one was worse. 2 months earlier, Derek had asked Evan to prepare a summary of his key contributions for compensation. Evan had listed 6 accomplishments. 4 were things I had built. 1 belonged to another engineer. The remaining item was an executive presentation. Derek had approved the summary without correcting any of it. I felt my anger rise, but strangely, it wasn't the hot kind anymore. It was colder, cleaner. For months, I had wondered whether I had somehow failed to communicate my value. Now, I was looking at written evidence that my value had been communicated perfectly well. It had simply been reassigned. Derek finally looked at me. "I should have reviewed this more carefully." It was the first thing he had said that sounded remotely like an admission. I didn't rescue him from it. The old version of me would have softened the moment, said something like, "I know things were hectic," or "I understand how this happened." I had spent years making uncomfortable situations easier for other people. Not this one. "You had the project history," I said. "You had my reviews. You had the incident reports. And you had 6 months of emails." He nodded once. "Yes." No speech, no dramatic victory, just one small word landing harder than every excuse that had come before it. Melissa explained that compensation was expanding the review. She wanted the bonus decision, performance evaluations, project ownership records, and management recommendations examined together. The VP asked whether the launch was still at risk. I told him the current issue had been stabilized, but several launch night procedures depended on people actually knowing their assigned systems. He looked at Evan. "Do they?" Evan answered too quickly. "The team is prepared." I said nothing. The VP noticed. "You disagree?" "I think we should test it." That afternoon, he ordered a full launch simulation with each listed owner responsible for their own component. No quiet handoffs, no private messages to me, no invisible safety net. The simulation started at 6 p.m. For the first hour, everything held. Then, a vendor authentication failure hit one of the integration paths. Evan was listed as owner. He opened the runbook, jumped to the wrong section, and told an engineer to restart a service that wasn't causing the problem. I watched from across the room. Nobody asked me to intervene. After 7 minutes, Evan looked toward me anyway. I kept my eyes on my own dashboard. Another engineer finally found the correct procedure in documentation I had written 4 months earlier, and restored the connection. 15 minutes later, a monitoring alert triggered in the recovery layer. This one was mine. I diagnosed it, assigned 2 checks, corrected the configuration, documented the change, and cleared it in 11 minutes. The contrast was impossible to hide now. By 9:30, the VP had stopped watching the dashboards and started watching the people. Evan noticed, too. His confidence thinned with every question. He began saying "we" whenever something worked and "the system" whenever something failed. Derek barely spoke. At 10:05, Melissa asked me to step into the hallway. "I can't discuss conclusions yet," she said, "but I need to ask you something directly. If your compensation had reflected your documented contribution, would you have raised any of these concerns?" I thought about it. The credit issue still would have bothered me, but I probably would have kept fixing everything quietly. She nodded. That's what I thought. When I returned to the war room, Evan was standing beside my chair. "You really want this to destroy my career?" he asked. I looked at him for a moment. "I haven't asked them to do anything to you. You gave them every email. They asked for the project record. You know what that does." "Yes," I said. "It shows what happened." He stared at me, waiting for anger, maybe even satisfaction. I gave him neither. Because that was the part he still didn't understand. I hadn't taken anything from him. I had simply stopped helping him hold what was never his. At 8:34 the next morning, Melissa sent 4 people a meeting invite marked Final Compensation Review. No one pretended it was routine anymore. Derek arrived first. Evan came in 2 minutes later without his laptop. The VP sat beside Melissa, and I took the last chair. Melissa didn't waste time. "The review is complete." She slid 2 pages across the table. The first corrected my project record. It named me as the primary technical architect of the launch, credited me with the recovery layer, vendor migration, deployment automation, and contingency design, and amended the internal history that had listed Evan as technical lead. The second page corrected the money. My $5,000 bonus was being replaced with a compensation adjustment that reflected my documented contribution. Evan's $38,000 award was being reviewed separately under company policy. I read the number once, then again. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't satisfied, because the number almost didn't matter anymore. For months, I had thought this story was about a stolen bonus. It wasn't. The money had simply exposed something much more expensive. The company had rewarded the person presenting the work and discounted the person keeping the project alive. Melissa turned to Derek. Your management review found failures in contribution verification, project attribution, and compensation documentation. His face stayed still. The VP continued. Effective immediately, you're no longer managing the launch. Evan looked up. Derek didn't. The VP assigned operational control to another director and technical launch authority to me through completion. No applause, no dramatic firing, just titles changing on a screen and access permissions updating before lunch. Corporate consequences were strangely quiet. Then Evan spoke. So what happens to me? Melissa answered carefully. Your employment isn't being discussed in this meeting. Your project record and bonus recommendation are under separate review. He looked at me like I had the answer he wanted. I didn't. I hadn't asked for him to lose his job. I hadn't demanded Derek be removed. I hadn't threatened anyone. I had asked one question months too late. Who actually did the work? And once the company answered honestly, everything else followed. The launch was scheduled for Friday night. At 11:40 p.m., the office was packed. Screens glowed across the floor. Takeout boxes covered the kitchen counter. Executives stood behind engineers, pretending not to watch every number. This time, the ownership chart matched reality. No one was quietly passing Evan's problems to me. No one was asking me to fix something while someone else presented it as leadership. Every component had a named owner. Every escalation was documented. And every decision moved through the process we should have been using from the beginning. At 1:58 a.m., the vendor latency started climbing. A month earlier, that would have triggered panic. Now, the responsible engineer called it immediately. I reviewed the metrics, approved the mitigation, and the team corrected it in 12 minutes. At 2:31, another alert appeared. Handled. At 2:44, the main deployment entered its final stage. I looked at the clock. 2:47 a.m. For a second, I remembered all those other nights at that exact kind of hour, sitting alone under fluorescent lights, silently rescuing systems while someone else slept comfortably and collected the credit. But this time, I wasn't saving anyone from their responsibilities. I was doing my job, and everyone in the room knew exactly whose job it was. At 3:06 a.m., the final dashboard turned green. The $21 million launch was live. Someone behind me started clapping. Then the rest of the room joined. I turned around and saw engineers hugging, exhausted managers smiling, the VP shaking hands with the vendor team. Derek wasn't there. Evan wasn't there either. Melissa found me near the windows a few minutes later. "Congratulations," she said. "On the launch?" She smiled. "On both." The corrected bonus hit my account the following pay cycle. My performance record was amended. My title changed 2 weeks later, along with my salary and formal technical authority. But the biggest change was smaller. People stopped calling me at midnight for problems they hadn't assigned to me. They stopped putting other names on my work. And I stopped confusing being indispensable with being respected. 3 months later, I received an email from a senior executive asking me to lead the next major platform project. I replied with one question before discussing anything else. Who owns what, and how will contribution be measured? The answer came back in writing. I accepted. I never got revenge on Evan. I never needed to. The paper trail restored the credit. The compensation review corrected the bonus. The launch proved the value. And management finally learned the lesson I had been teaching them for years without meaning to. If one employee is quietly saving every crisis, you don't actually have a strong system. You have a dependency. And if you reward the person taking credit for that dependency instead of the person carrying it, eventually the rescue stops being invisible. At 2:47 a.m., mine did. And that was when they finally saw me.